everybody. Welcome back to another episode of Coast to Coast on the Her Hoop Stats Podcast Network. I'm Crina Mustafa alongside Calvin Wetzel. We got a lot to get into today. We're going to talk some playoff race for that eighth and final spot, a little bit of Dallas Wings getting eliminated. Then we're going to go into the New York Liberty and the Las Vegas Aces, a little bit of an update on that rivalry so far and kind of previewing how we think they'll fare in the playoffs. And then, of course, we've got games to watch at the end of the pod today. We're inching closer and closer to the playoffs. By the time you hear the next Coast to Coast episode, it'll be one final day left in the regular season, which is kind of wild to think about. Cal, are you ready for that? And are you ready for this episode?
I am ready for this episode. It's episode 50. Let's go.
It is episode 50. Love me some even numbers. We're halfway to 100. Let's keep it pushing. Thanks so much for rocking with us. And with that, let's get started with our headline of the week. We got a couple of headlines of the week. I kind of framed it as Dallas Wings eliminated from the playoffs, Angel Reese out for the season. Chicago's trying to grab that eighth and final spot. And the Mystics are in the mix, which we kind of hinted at in our previous conversations on the pod. But let's start with Chicago. They're 13-22 right now. They're currently in that eighth spot. They had a huge win over LA, and then they beat the Dallas Wings to eliminate them from playoff contention as well. State your case for each team, and we'll start with the Chicago Sky. How do you view them going down this last stretch of games here?
Yeah, the best case for them to make the playoffs, like no disrespect, is just that they have the lead right now. I think that they're in front of both of the other two teams. They have a game and a half lead as of recording. They will play later tonight on Wednesday. Other than that, I think without Angel Reese, we're going to talk more about that later. I do think this is the third best team out of this group of three teams that's fighting for that spot, just because of what they lose in production with her. But obviously, they have a little bit of cushion, and they have the head-to-head over Atlanta right now, 2-1. They do play one more time at Atlanta, which we can also talk about. The tiebreaker scenario could get really interesting. I was kind of digging into this and nerding out on this a little bit. And by the way, for anyone who wants to get deep in the weeds like I did, the Her Hoop Stats, like the schedule grid, if you go to like Ether, and then they have like the teams on the left and the top, it's really helpful for like the head-to-head tiebreakers and stuff. So go check that out. So obviously Chicago up 2-1. If they win that game, they're up 3-1. That's easy. They win head-to-head. If Atlanta wins that game, and Atlanta's behind the standings right now anyway, so they probably have to win that game at home next week, it might actually come down to point differential, which is crazy because the next tiebreaker would be after head-to-head would be record against teams 500 or better, which is probably going to be the Fever on up in the standings. The Mercury are 17 and 19. They could possibly get there and change things. But right now, both teams are 4 and 16 against that group of teams from the Fever onwards up in the standings. So then you would go to the next one, which is point differential head to head. The Sky are up 8 points in those 3 games head to head right now against the Dream. So there might be a scenario where the Dream not only need to win that game against the Sky, but need to win by at least 8 or 9 points, which would be really, really fun. You don't see that happen very often in non-international sport. That kind of happens in like the Olympics and stuff like that all the time. But I kind of hope it does, because I think it would be like really exciting at the end of the game if you get fouls or something like that. But yeah, the biggest case for the Sky is the fact that they have that lead in the standings. They have that tiebreaker lead. They have that point differential lead and all of that kind of stuff.
I was gonna say, as somebody who's just come off of working an Olympics where point differential was very much a factor, especially on the Canadian side, it is very stressful. Can confirm. So this is gonna be fun because I don't have any ties to any of these teams. So if it needs to come down to point differential, then let the drama ensue. But speaking of Atlanta, they are 12-24 right now in that ninth spot. They beat Dallas. Poor Dallas. We'll talk about Dallas in a little bit. They lost by 4 points to Indiana, and they also lost to Minnesota Lynx this week as well, which is not as bad of a loss as with Minnesota being one of the top teams in the league. State your case for Atlanta about how you view them going down this last stretch of games, and Before we even get into that, like for those who don't know the remaining schedule with these three teams that we're talking about right now, which are the Sky, the Dream, and the Mystics, they play against each other a couple of times. They play against some good teams. So it's like every game is important to make that eighth final spot. But how do you see this going down for Atlanta?
Yeah, so I think the dream's best case is the fact that they're healthy right now, which was not the case earlier in the year, and it's not the case for the other two teams. And so, as currently constructed, what they're putting on the court right now, I think they're the best of these three teams because you have like we said, no Angel. We get into the Mystics, no Shakira right now, and Ryan Howard, we talked about her last week, shooting the absolute lights out. Tina is just beasting. We talked about her last week as well. Obviously, they didn't get that win over the Lynx. Lynx are one of the top teams in the league. But when it comes to these three teams right now, if they were all starting level, it would be the dream to me without question. Obviously, they have to make up that gap, and which is probably going to require beating this guy in that game that we talked about. So that's where it gets iffy for them. But overall, I think they have the best chance of these three teams if they get in to potentially steal again. I don't think any of these three teams is going to actually win a playoff series, but of any of them, if any of them were going to even steal like one game and make it a 3-game series, I think the Dream would have the best chance to do that.
Yeah, I think I'm with you on that. And then a third team that is making things interesting are the Washington Mystics. They're 11-24 right now in that 10th spot. Huge win over Phoenix. Very close loss against the Minnesota Lynx, which was impressive considering we just said they're one of the top teams in the league, and Atlanta couldn't beat them either. What about them? What are these like last few games left on the schedule like for them? And state your case for how do you view them going down this last stretch?
Yeah, the Mystics are really interesting because we're going to find out in the next 3 games if they would rather be in the playoffs or be in the Page sweepstakes because their next 3 games are against those other two teams, the Sky and then two against the Dream.
Yep.
And so it you have the opportunity, even though right now you're in 10th, to play yourself into the playoffs. You just take care of it. You don't need help from anyone else to beat anyone else. You take care of business and you can beat those teams that you're competing with and you can get in if you want it. Or if you want in the Page sweepstakes, you have an opportunity to do that too in the next 3 games.
Yeah.
And one of those games is going to be decided by the time you're listening to this. It's really a toss up to me, Mystic Sky, tonight as we're recording. So we're gonna learn a lot, I think, in that game. But the other advantage I think the Mystics have, even aside from those 3 games, is that they have, I think, the easiest schedule of these three teams. They only have one game left against that top five, who we've kind of talked about all year as being those championship contenders, and that's at home against New York on the last weekend when New York is probably going to have already wrapped up the 1 seed. They may or may not be fully going hard in that game. So I do think the Mystics have the easiest path, but also they're starting from behind. They're in 10th. So we'll see what happens in these next 3 games.
Yep, they control their own destiny, so we'll see how it goes. It's funny to see that they are playing against each other in these next kind of stretch of games. Let's kind of get into the more of the nitty-gritty of this all. We'll start with the Dallas Wings, as I kind of hinted at. They're eliminated from playoff contention. Not really the position they wanted to be in. We talked a little bit last week where they looked like they wanted to get into the playoffs, but it just seems like a lot just went wrong for them this season. So, like Cal, I'm going to ask you, like, what went wrong for them, and how does this kind of affect the team moving forward? With Satu Sabli's deal expiring next year, and just the fact that they didn't make the playoffs this year after being a team that we really thought was on the up and up these last couple of seasons.
Yeah, obviously injuries were a big part of it. You had Satu out for a while, Natasha Howard was out for a while, Maddie Segrist missed some time. But also, I just don't, and I've said this on this pod before. I just don't think there's any excuse for this team to be last in the league in defensive rebounding with the size that they have, regardless of like who was injured and who was not. Like even when Natasha Howard and Satu are out, like you still have McCowan, you still have Kalani Brown, like you still have Arike is one of the better rebounders at the guard position. And since the break, when they have been healthy, if you just look at the numbers since then, they're still last in the league in defensive rebounding since Satu and Natasha Howard have been back. And it's actually their defensive rebounding rate's actually worse over that period than it is on the full season. So I just don't understand like why this team doesn't box anyone out. And it's the biggest. It's not like this team isn't like full court pressing all the time or playing some like crazy hardcore denial defense, where they're like making up for it by forcing turnovers or anything. It's just flat out not good defense. And it's going to be one of the worst defenses statistically ever. I've said this on this pod before. I'm going to say it again. Outside of Indiana in that shortened bubble season, this is the worst defensive rating ever in the league. So I don't know if LT is back as coach. Maybe she is, maybe she's not. If not, what they need is a coach who can shore up that end of the floor. And again, we don't know, like you said, Satu or some of the other pieces, like how the roster will look either. But if they want to get back to where it felt like they were going last year when they got up to the top 4 in the league, made the semis, you have to at least kind of guard someone and box out a little bit. Like it doesn't matter how much you can fill it up on the other end. And Enrique's a bucket, and obviously with Satu back and Natasha Howard's been getting buckets too. But like at some point, you got to guard someone too. So that's what I'm watching over the offseason for this team and kind of what direction they go.
Cal stepping into his hater bag. Anyway, no, I'm just kidding. This is a joke for all you people out there who take things too seriously. All right, let's get into Chicago a little bit more with that Angel Reese injury. She went on Instagram Live, kind of giving a little bit more details. She's out for the rest of the season. The rest of the season being the next week, of course, like in the regular season. But she's got a hairline fracture in her wrist, and it's more of like a precautionary thing. She did go through surgery, so she's in a cast for like the next I can't remember. I think it's either 2 weeks or 4 weeks. I can't remember the exact number, but the entire time of her recovery is comes to 6 weeks total. How does this affect Chicago vying for that eighth spot? I mean, we've talked about how impactful her rookie season has been so far, and this is the last stretch for them, and they're in that eighth spot right now. But we kind of previewed about how things might change very quickly for them.
It's huge. Obviously, it goes without saying. Like, of course, you lose a star, like it's going to be huge. And they've played one game without her, and they won. They were playing the Wings, who we just got done talking about. The Wings didn't shoot very well in that game, and the Sky did, which was kind of uncharacteristic of both teams. So I wouldn't say that game is like indicative of the Sky didn't miss Angel or anything like that. They just played well in that one game, but they're gonna miss her a lot down the stretch. And I do think like feel really bad for her. Hope she heals up. Glad she's gonna be good for Unrivaled coming up. And I think this was smart to go ahead and get this taken care of. Like she said, maybe could have played through it, but would have been risky, long term. But in terms of like what it means for the Sky, like I don't think it's a huge secret that this team doesn't have shooters. Like the way this team is constructed right now, it's not really constructed with a bunch of outside shooting. Like even their best scorer, Kennedy Carter, who's electric, dynamic, can score on anyone. She's really not a huge like deep threat. She's more of like mid range, get to the bucket. So there's a lot of offensive rebounds on this team to be had because they're not like lighting it up from deep. Like this is the only team in the last 7 years, other than the Bill Lambier Aces, who we all remember, who never shot threes. This is the only other team in that time frame to take under 15 threes a game. So like what Angel brings specifically for the way that this roster is constructed, with her motor and her effort and her offensive rebounding and getting those second opportunities for this team, is really, really big on the offense. And obviously, she's had a huge impact on the defensive end as well. One of the highest on offs in the league. So I will say, like, on the other end, I think Izzy Harrison is great, and she's kind of been slept on and underrated, and very like easy for all of us to forget how good she is and what she brings to the table when she was coming off the bench playing behind these rookies. And now, that last game she started next to Camila Cardoso, and she had a 20 piece. So it's really cool to kind of see her getting her opportunity back. And because she's had some very good moments and some success in this league, but clearly this team is going to miss Angel Reese a lot.
Yeah, for sure. And also just a small tangent. The Bill Lambier Aces are not that long ago, but it's starting to feel like it was a long time ago.
It
It just
does,
feels like
right?
a different era of history, even though it literally has been like what, a few seasons now. So that's kind of wild to think about. But yeah, that gave me a good chuckle when you said that, because they were not shooting the three ball at all during that
Nope.
era. So it's a good way to put that in a little bit of perspective. But yeah, that's the playoff race right now for that eighth and final spot. A lot of these teams are playing against each other in this next week, so make sure you keep an eye out on that. And it may come down to point differential, like Cal mentioned earlier in the podcast. And so I hope it does. Make sure you're following Cal because I'm sure he'll be updating us on the point differential stuff as the results kind of keep going. But let's move to the top of the standings now and talk a little bit more about these top teams. Okay, New York Liberty versus Las Vegas Aces. A tale as old as time, a rivalry as old as time, a rivalry as old as 2 seasons, but it is what it is. New York just squeaked past Las Vegas 75-71 in a game that didn't have Asia Wilson. As we know, she's got a little bit of a foot injury and is in that boot for a preventative reason. Cal, what did you see in that game? And like, does that close result concern you at all?
Kinda. Yeah, I saw pretty much like what I expected for most of the game until the Aces bench came in and the Liberty were up 20 and the Liberty took out their stars too. And that game 4 last year in the finals, like other than the fact that obviously the Liberty like didn't take out their stars, like in that game, it felt like a little bit of deja vu in the sense that like the Liberty were up double digits in that game. The Aces were shorthanded. Chelsea Gray was out in that game, obviously, and the Aces came back and won that game, and they didn't quite come back and win this game, but they came back and made the Liberty bring back in all their starters, really had to sweat it out. I think, like, if you're the Liberty, like, you gotta smell blood in that situation. You gotta put that team away, especially when I mean, when it's any team, but especially when it's your big rival, like you were just talking about, the team that beat you in the finals, that two-time defending champ that is kind of that measuring stick that you're trying to overcome to get to where you want, which is a championship. And so I think back to like a few years ago, game 3 of the finals. It was right before the Aces got to the level that they're at, turned into this dynasty and started winning championships. They made the finals. They got swept. The Storm beat them by like 50 in game 3. And I think of like that Storm team, like they had that. It was like they were up 2-0. They were up whatever 20 or 30 in game 3. Like it would have been easy for them to coast, but the Storm were like, no, we're putting this thing away because that's what champions do. And so that is mildly concerning. I like to think that also like the Liberty will rather have that happen in the regular season than like in the playoffs and
Yeah.
kind of look at this and kind of figure out what they need to do in these situations. And I can't necessarily blame Sandy for taking out the starters either because like you do have a stranglehold on that one seed. Like you want to get some people rest and things like that. But
Nyjah goes down as well too, so it's
yeah,
stuff like that that you're kind of balancing now, and it sounds like Benijah Laney is nothing too serious, so hopefully she can be fully healthy for this playoff run. Both these teams have fairly easy schedules to end the season outside of a game or two that they have against another top team in the league. What should their focus be in this last stretch for each team, for both the Aces and the Liberty?
yeah, you obviously are probably gonna have some things that you need to tweak and kind of figure out, on either end of the side. But really, like, just stay healthy. Like for the Liberty, like you mentioned, like Benijah obviously had a scare. So glad she's okay because that looked like it could have been a lot worse than it
Oh
was.
yeah.
And that's why I never fault coaches for like I talk about like, oh, the Liberty gotta like have the killer instinct, but it's whoever's on the court. I always think that coaches leave their players in too long as a side note. And so like you look back at like when Paige got hurt, and like Gino left her in like the last minute of a 20-point game. Like I hate when stuff like that happens. So I'm not like advocating for that for the record. But when yeah, I think both these teams just need to focus on like kind of resting up and staying healthy because I don't think either of them have like a ton to play for in terms of like seeding and whatnot. Like the Aces would like to make sure they host in the first round, but aside from Benijah, like on the Aces side, like you have Asia missed a game, she's going to be back now, but obviously like a little bit banged up, and she never misses games, so that's it.
It was like the first game she missed in like 5 years or something, some crazy stat like
Yeah,
that, like,
yeah, exactly. Like, it's real that they, like, are taking it seriously when that happens. Jackie
affect her
hasn't
whole
looked
career.
it's right. Especially, like, in her prime, like you said, like, a half decade now, and even aside from that, like, Chelsea still doesn't feel like she's in peak form scoring-wise, like, Jackie hasn't looked fresh since the Olympics, so you're the Aces, you just wanna come in playoffs peak shape, and both these teams, like, you just wanna make sure you're healthy.
Yeah, and it's all about timing now as we do get closer to the playoffs. And like we said, the Aces and Liberty could meet in the semis. If you had them in a playoff series against each other, what do you predict happens? Not that like we're some like crazy people who can predict exactly what's going to happen and we know every single thing, but as of right now, what do you foresee could go down in this series?
I still think, gun to my head, I'm taking the Aces until further notice, and I do think that this is gonna be, like, an all-out battle, like, 5 games, but I honestly until someone knocks off the Aces in the playoffs, and until, like, the Liberties show me in the playoffs, I have to go with the Aces, like, 51-49. Like, it's so close, but
Well, this will be their moment to show
yeah.
if they can do it, because that will literally be the matchup to determine that. I think if they do that, they'll just keep rolling, unless Minnesota decides to add some fuel to the fire. But oh my god, that just gets me excited for talking about playoff matchups. Can't wait to do that. Last two things on the Aces. One, do you want to see the Aces incorporate Queen Egbo now? You know, they just extended her contract again for another 7 days. What do you want to see more of from her? Because she hasn't really played that many minutes so far since they've signed her.
Yes, is the answer. I do wanna see them incorporate her more. I'm glad you put that question in our notes here because I first off, I that goes to what we were talking about, like, help keep Asia fresh a little bit and just give her a rest and get Queens some run with the rotation, and you never know what happens in the playoffs with injuries or foul trouble or anything like that, and someone needs to step up. Like last year in the finals, the Aces won the finals because, like, obviously, Asia Wilson and some of their stars, but they also won the finals because Sydney Colson and Kayla George were ready to go when they needed to be called upon, and they stepped up big time. And so you never know when something like that's going to happen. So now is the time to get her integrated and get her kind of comfortable with this team, and I think that it's a great question, and definitely yes. Let's see what she has.
Absolutely, because like you signed her in that final spot for a reason for the rest of the season. So it'll be nice. It'll be nice to see some more playing time. All right. Anything else on this rivalry before we get into games to watch for the rest of the week?
Yeah, not too much. It's still like kind of I'm still processing like you mentioned that this is most likely if it does happen going to be in the semifinals, and it's just so weird. It doesn't feel like it's going to feel like the finals, and then it's going to be like one team's going to come out of this war and have like another series to go win, which is still I'm still just wrapping my mind around that. It's kind of crazy.
Yeah, definitely. I think people would have liked to see like this is a rematch in the finals, just because of how everything went down last year. But it would be nice to still see this rivalry go down in the playoffs if they both make it to the semifinals, which I think a lot of people are predicting that would happen. All right, that's New York Liberty versus Las Vegas Aces, and now we are going to get into our games to watch for the rest of the week. And I just want to say, Cal promised y'all last week on the pod, he said, Crina's gonna have graphics ready for you. She's got nothing else better to do. Because I would just sit here and list out every single matchup for the rest of the week and hoping that you guys have your notebooks and your pens out. This is your call to make sure that you're watching on YouTube at Her Hoop Stats. Because guess what? I listened to Cal and I have graphics for this week for games to watch. So let's get into those.
I love I had just have to say, like, so you could put that graphic back up because these
Uh-huh.
graphics are cool, and I just randomly decided to, like, add work to your plate last week, like, without telling you. I was just like, "Hey, everyone, like, Karina's gonna do this," and then not only did you do it, but the screenshots that you put in our notes, like, that's what I thought you were gonna use, just, like, something really easy,
Yeah.
just move it over. You went the extra mile as to make these dope graphics that everyone on YouTube is watching right now. Like, I didn't even have that in mind, but that's why Karina is the GOAT and why everyone out there should hire her because, like, if you ask her to do something, she's gonna do it, like, 3 times as good as you ever imagined. So, everyone go to YouTube and look at these sick graphics for the games to watch.
Thank you, Cal. I just like it's just in me, I'm like, you tell me to do something or you ask me to do something, and I'm like, okay, I have to do it this way. Like this is my vision. I have to go above and beyond on this. So yeah, let's get into it. I have this nice one with the pictures in for Thursday because there's only one matchup and I could fit the pictures in. And we have on Thursday, September 12th, because as we're recording, it is Wednesday. So the Wednesday games are currently happening tonight if you're listening to them. But on Thursday, we have the New York Liberty versus the Dallas Wings, 7 p.m. Eastern on Prime Video. New York Liberty trying to lock up that one seed. Dallas Wings out of playoff contention. So I guess just continuing to play together and maybe work on some of that defensive rebounding, like you mentioned, Cal. And then on Friday, we have, of course, Fridays on Ion, WNBA on Ion. We've got 1, 2, 3, 4 matchups at 7:30 p.m. Eastern, which is why I have them all up there. We've got Mystics versus Dream vying for that 8th spot. Then we've got Las Vegas Aces versus Indiana Fever, Seattle Storm versus Dallas Wings, and then the Chicago Sky against the Minnesota Lynx. We'll see how they fare as well as they keep fighting for that 8th spot. And then we have one game at 10 p.m. Eastern on League Pass and Ion, of course, Connecticut Sun versus Phoenix Mercury. That should be a good one as well, I think, to kind of see where Phoenix is at. We've kind of talked about that on the pod a little bit too. And then it's kind of funny, Cal, because you mentioned that you thought I was just going to put the screenshots up. Well, I kind of did that for the Sunday games because I was going through these graphics and I was like, I'm getting a bit lazy. So here are the graphics for Sunday. Here are the games. They're kind of sectioned off into two parts, and this is via WNBA.com. 3 matchups at 3 p.m. Eastern. We got Dallas Wings versus Indiana Fever, Minnesota Lynx versus New York Liberty. That should be a good one as well. And then, of course, Atlanta Dream versus Washington Mystics. As we talked about, they are playing against each other a bunch. All 3 of those matchups will be on League Pass. And then in the evening on Sunday, we've got 3 more matchups, all at 6 p.m. Eastern. So if you love to triple screen, Sunday is a great day to do that. We've got Phoenix Mercury versus Chicago Sky. That'll be on League Pass. Then we got Connecticut Sun versus Las Vegas Aces, which is one of the few remaining nationally televised games that will be on CBS Sports Network. And then we have Los Angeles Sparks versus Seattle Storm, also at 6 p.m. Eastern on League Pass. Those are all the games on Sunday. So if you want to stay in and watch the WNBA on Sunday, I think that's a great day to do it. We've got a lot of really cool matchups, some that have playoff implications, some that have contender implications, and some that are just going to be pure basketball and kind of a litmus test for each of these teams. So there's your schedule for the remaining days of the week, and then we've got only a couple of days left until the regular season is wrapping up, and we'll get into playoff talk soon. But do you have any matchups that you're kind of excited for, Cal, just on this upcoming schedule that I just mentioned?
Absolutely. Atlanta, Washington twice. We talked about that for the ramifications for the 8 seed, especially depending on what happens with Chicago tonight. And Aces Fever Part 2. Part 1 is tonight. It'll be done by the time you're listening, and then they play again. Obviously, really fun teams. And I love Asia versus Aaliyah Boston anytime that matchup happens. The former Gamecocks, always fun to watch. Then you have Lynx Liberty is the other one I'm looking for. I think the Lynx have matched up really well with New York this year, and that's a potential finals preview since Liberty Aces is not a finals preview. It's a semifinals preview, but Lynx Liberty is a possible finals preview, and we saw them in the Commissioner's Cup. Lynx got that one, so definitely looking forward to that one as well.
100%. Totally on board with you there. Very, very excited to watch that matchup go down. Man, oh man, we have been talking about the playoffs since like the first week of the season, and now we've got 1 week left of the regular season. Time is flying. Summer's still here, but it's almost over. You kind of know when summer is ending, just with the WNBA timeline. So yeah, we're getting closer. Do you want to shout out Her Hoop Stats, another new podcast? We kind of hinted at it last week. We said they don't have a name yet. They finally do have a name. So shout out Chelsea, Tyler, and Jamie. Go watch the press break, which I think is a fantastic name, worth the 2-episode wait, or I should say 3-episode wait, because they just released this week as well too. But go watch that. All the podcasts on Her Hoop Stats. Make sure you're following us on social media at Her Hoop Stats. Subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. You can follow myself at Crina MM. You can follow Cal at Wetzel31. Coast to Coast hits your feeds every single. Today's Wednesday, Thursday. I should know when our show gets released.
We change it all the time. It's all good.
That was a bit of an unforced error. Anyway, Coast to Coast every Thursday. Thank you so much for rocking with us. This is episode 50. So thanks so much for listening. And if you're a new listener, appreciate you. If you're a long-time listener, appreciate you. But yeah, Cal, you got anything else before we head off?
Yeah, shout out the press break. I feel like it's a good cousin to Coast to Coast. I feel like you can, if you break the press and go coast to coast, that I like. I feel like, some of these dynamic guards can kind of do both of those. So I like it.
Cal's Wings, take notes. Okay. Anyway, let's wrap this up before I get called a hater as well. Thanks for tuning in, and we will see you next week.